Chapter 6 of A Diamond Sky Above Titanic, a Good Omens fanfiction, written by SeaBlueEyes, read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. A Diamond Sky Above Titanic, Chapter 6, The Dawn. Crowley and Aziraphale were the stars of the night. They were praised and congratulated. They were bought drinks and handed smokes. They were ogled at by fresh-faced young girls and the occasional fresh-faced young boy. They were asked and asked and asked if they could please play one more song, just one more. And did they do birthday parties? And where had they come from? And which composer was their greatest inspiration? And, of course, who on earth were they? Neither was fully comfortable beneath such attention. But then, the moment now having cooled, to leave mere reality once more. Leave the afterwards, the afterglows, and the after-images, and the terrifying, tantalizing, inevitable after-effects. Neither was fully comfortable with leaving just yet, and being alone together. They were each still trying to make sense of what had just happened, even as, deep within, they already knew the answer, and knew that they had only to admit it. It was strange to be so completely and utterly happy, yet at the same time completely and utterly scared to death. They stayed close to each other, not quite touching, but close enough that anyone who was watching could see it. The tenderness in which they held the other with their eyes, the total devotion that was so evident on their faces, the knowing glances they shared, as secretive and complex as a foreign language that only they understood. And the people of third class knew instinctively not to ask them, not to pry, to leave them be. They had earned that much. Later, at the urging of several decidedly hopeful middle-aged women, they danced some more. This time on the floor, they weren't just accepted or tolerated, as before, but included. Their hands were held as everyone linked to form a circle. They were jigged with and imitated by admirers of their strange dancing. One small girl, perhaps 5 years old, even tugged on Crowley's shirt and asked him shyly if she could stand on his feet as he danced, just like her papa let her. Crowley had looked at Aziraphale and laughed.
Sorry, kid. Not really my thing,
he told her. And it was true. Hell wasn't very big on making small children happy. If anything, he should be the one standing on her feet. But he frowned all the same at her crestfallen little face. He tried again, brow furrowing as he thought.
Well, perhaps,
Perhaps just once, then, Aziraphale suggested.
Actually, Angel, I was going to suggest she dance with you.
Ah, but she asked for you, my dear Crowley, beamed Aziraphale. Then to the girl. What's your name, little one?
Cora?
she told him shyly, staring up at them both with big blue eyes. She looked so adorably innocent that Crowley wondered if he'd singe where he touched her. "Well, young Cora, I know that Mr. Crowley here would be simply delighted to have you as his partner. Isn't that right, dear?" Said Crowley. "Superb," said Aziraphale. "I'll hold your drink, shall I?" Crowley, it had to be said, probably danced better with a 5-year-old shrieking with delight on his feet as he shuffled about. It gave his awkward movements some excuse for their gracelessness. And, though he would have never admitted it after guinea-pigging every method in the How to Be the Best Ever Spanish Inquisitor guidebook, it wasn't actually that bad. Borderline fun, even. Mostly, though, the angel and the demon danced with each other. Or rather, they orbited one another. They didn't seem to realize that they were doing it, this non-dance, as they faced each other on the dance floor and absent-mindedly swayed to their own beat, occasionally swinging a wrist up or shuffling their feet as though in afterthought. What exactly was occurring within their thoughts as they did was impossible to tell. They never touched, but their hands would move compulsively of their own accord, every now and again, as though reaching out, but then remembering their place. And, as though on a loop, they would become slowly and unconsciously closer and closer to each other as they moved, until they noticed the inches between their bodies and drew back, looking down in embarrassment, before meeting the eyes of the other again, and then beginning the cycle all over once more. When they eventually left, the hours having waned away swifter than minutes, the pre-dawn sky was a hazy blue-gray, restlessly anticipating the coming sunrise. There was a ghostly mist glazing the surface of the water that curled up and around as the ship sliced onward across the ocean. It was chilly. They wrapped their thin dinner jackets tighter around themselves before remembering to miracle an aureole of warmth. They were drunk, but clear-headed enough to appreciate the peace of the morning. So the tune they sang, the band's last one, a popular hit from the Irish mainland, was sung softly on the tide of their steaming breaths. "We set sail at 1:30,
Looking for a new tomorrow.
Don't know when we're coming home.
So we'll drink and we'll dance and we'll drown our sorrows."
They hummed the chorus together, which mostly consisted of a series of cheery "Hey, Lottie, heys," smiling absent-mindedly to themselves, acutely aware of the other's presence. They walked side by side, still not touching, but in their inebriation they might sway a little and occasionally knock into the other, and the other one would reach out a gentle hand to steady him. The salty air and their own willpower sobered them up as they continued down the deck, until eventually the silly singing became too awkward, and companionable silence ensued. There was a moment's still slightly drunken confusion when they found themselves somehow at the very bow of the ship, unable to go further.
"Say, Angel, I reckon we've taken a wrong turning somewhere,"
said Crowley musingly, looking up at the threads of ropes tightly strung above them. I think you're right, my dear, returned Aziraphale, unconcernedly glancing behind them. We must have gone right past the reception. There was a pause, quiet except for the distant thundering of the water beneath them, as Titanic plowed onward. Crowley felt the last of the alcohol leave his bloodstream in that tight, uncomfortable, squeezing sensation, akin to the manner in which a sponge is wrung out by short-tempered hands. Beside him, Aziraphale was also wincing from the same effect. Crowley strode forward and maneuvered his way around the ropes and bollards and "no passengers beyond this point" signs, until the angle of the ship's nose was curving around his body, the railings cold through his clothing where he pressed against them. He held the bars with both hands and leaned far over, stared down some 20 feet below at the frothy torrent of roiling ocean spraying the ship's flanks. It was difficult to gauge what speed they were traveling at, with no landmark features to focus on. But, judging by how the air rippled his shirt and whipped his hair back from his face, when everywhere else on the Atlantic was so still, it had to be fast. Good, he thought. That coal shortage should arrive any day now. He heard Aziraphale come to join him, so straightened up and shuffled over to make room. He swallowed audibly.
A nice morning, huh?
He said awkwardly. The angel rested his wrists across the railings, steepled his fingers. He looked up at the sky, also avoiding meeting the eyes of his companion. Yes, it is, he said. It's going to be a magnificent sunrise when it comes. Quiet again. Crowley moistened his lips.
The party was pretty good, wasn't it? Those third classers, they really know how to party, don't they?
Oh, yes, certainly, said Aziraphale, nodding emphatically. The music was, very good.
Yeah, it was. The, whatchamacallit, the bagpipe guy, he had some serious talent.
Yes, he did. It's a beautiful instrument. The silence descended again. Crowley turned.
Huh?
A moment's hesitation. Why are we, making the small conversation?
Pardon?
The small conversation. Aziraphale's cheeks glowed faintly pink. That's what you call it, isn't it? This idle, desultory chit-chat thingy that the first-class populace are constantly exercising.
Oh, small talk.
Crowley felt heat suffusing his own skin. Only his blush, rather less delicately, just flamed his entire face scarlet.
Well, usually when people small talk, it's because there's something, that they really want to say, and, get out in the open. Only neither of them want to say it first because it could be really awkward and weird for them and sort of completely ruin a friendship that's taken millennia to establish if the other person doesn't agree with what's been said, or something like that.
Then, horrified by his careless wording, he found himself babbling further.
I mean, I don't know. It varies, really, in different examples. It's a complicated piece of psychology, mostly not worth bothering with. Take it from me. You said you thought we were small-talking. I don't know. Maybe we were. What was it we were talking about? I can't really recall.
The weather, said Aziraphale, mildly. And the party.
Oh.
The silence this time was full-blown awkward. But why then could Crowley feel the faintest hint of a smile lifting the corner of his mouth, feel himself leaning forward in his anticipation? Crowley. Crowley turned again to meet the angel's gaze, and this time his heart jumped just a little. Beneath his neat glasses, Aziraphale's eyes, deep as the ocean, as inherently wise and weary and warm as only an angel's could be, were alight with a kind of suppressed amusement.
Yeah, Angel.
Crowley tried to keep his voice steady and casual. Aziraphale looked away and blessed the railings with the tiniest of smiles. That was small talk then, wasn't it? Crowley stared. Then he startled them both by laughing. And Aziraphale joined him. And all the tension that had been building up was tossed to the wind. What was he doing being fearful of this moment together? This was Aziraphale. Everything for the rest of eternity was going to be fine. It was like letting out a breath, this realizing. It was like release.
Yeah, Aziraphale, smiled Crowley. Well done. That was small talk.
Aziraphale smiled back. Their eyes met. Crowley braced himself. He knew what was coming. What do you suppose exactly happened back there? The demon inhaled, slowly and quietly. He didn't need to ask what the angel meant. Back there, what had happened when they'd performed together, when their music had become one perfect harmony, when they'd felt their insides sing with the joy of playing, of union, when they had looked into each other's eyes and seen their own expressions and emotions mirrored exactly. Crowley knew that some essential part of his relationship with the angel had changed as they played together, had, in fact, been changing throughout the whole voyage. It had been changing since the moment he saw his angel standing there by himself on the docks of Southampton, surrounded by all those tartan suitcases that were so ridiculous, but also so Aziraphale, when the last time they'd laid eyes on each other had been almost a century before. The longest time they'd ever been apart since the arrangement. And then there had been a dinner, which seemed an eternity ago now. Crowley's mind was momentarily filled with that radiant image of his angel, standing in the middle of the staircase, looking so regal and elegant and solitary, like a great historical hero carved as a woodcut in some ancient Catholic tome. Yes, He knew exactly what had happened back there. Back in the present, on the bow of that handsome ship, rich mellow colors seeping into the gray canvas of the sky by the second, Crowley exhaled a shuddering breath. The words were in his mouth now, waiting to be irrevocably unleashed, and he could almost taste them, feel how they would feel as he spoke them. Oh, God, somebody, this was going to hurt. Demons weren't supposed to use words like these in relation to themselves. He had no idea what it would do to him. He didn't even know if he could do it. "I think," he began. His voice was oddly cracked, like a man having held his silence for years. He swallowed, worked some moisture in his mouth, and tried to go on. "I think what just happened was... Could he do this? He swallowed again, deliberately this time, huffed out a breath that rose like a spectre in front of their faces before dissipating. Aziraphale was watching, curious. He didn't understand the internal battle that was raging within his companion. "I think... My dear, perhaps..." No, Angel, just shut up for a second, would you? I'm almost there, okay? Just give me a minute." He held a hand up exasperatedly at the angel to silence him. "I'm a bloody demon, you know. This kind of stuff doesn't come naturally to us. Cut me a break here." Right. Very well." Anyway, Crowley turned back at the blank ocean to scowl at it. Right. So, you think? Aziraphale prompted, helpfully. Right, yeah. What I was trying to say was that I think that... Oh, hell! Bloody hell! This is so bloody hard! Right. Aziraphale waited, patiently, poised completely still, strung as tightly as his violin. I think... No, he was wrong. Aziraphale wasn't patient at all. One moment he was standing there beside the demon, a reassuringly generous foot between them, and the next, the angel's soft heat was all around him. So swift was Aziraphale's action of turning to take the demon's wind-chilled face in both his hands, of leaning in to close that foot into an inch. Crowley stopped trying to talk. He stopped trying to think. His mind came to a standstill, trains of thoughts losing all coordination and crashing into each other, crumpling into unsalvageable heaps of twisted, half-finished sentences. Aziraphale moved his thumbs in circles around Crowley's cheeks, and light flooded into the demon's eyes as his sunglasses dissolved. "Bitter," murmured the angel. His words smelled of cassia, though Crowley wasn't even sure he remembered what cassia smelled like. Perhaps it was Eden. The rush of nostalgia was so strong and unfamiliar, it was dizzying. Aziraphale was trembling with suppressed emotion. It took all of his will not to betray his anticipation into his voice as he spoke, calmly and collectedly. "You were saying, my dear?" Crowley had forgotten how to breathe.
"Aziraphale,"
he whispered.
Aziraphale.
Aziraphale's hands tightened convulsively around the demon.
"I think last night."
They were so close to each other now. Crowley's mouth was stinging. Demons weren't supposed to speak of such things. Not ever. But still he went on. His eyes were so bright and wide they seemed to glow.
"Last night, Aziraphale, last night, I think we fell in love."
There was a moment, an empty moment of stillness, during which the world seemed to pause to consider this revelation, to tilt its head in wonder. And then, without knowing who moved first, almost without even realizing what they were doing, they were leaning in, closing the space between them, and their lips were touching. The kiss was light and gentle, the most careful and delicate of touches, the most tentative. Those first few, stunned, inconceivable seconds of contact were filled with disbelief and disburdening and discovery. And then, most terrifying of all, dangerous, irrepressible hope that sang within them, heedless of their complete and utter vulnerability. Neither angel nor demon dared move deeper, to do anything that might break the spell, that might startle the other into pulling back and ending this madness. And yet, regardless, it fit. It made sense. It was perfect. Pulses quickened, breaths shortened, muscles contracted, and, completely of its own accord, the kiss evolved. Aziraphale couldn't help the soft noise of surprised pleasure that escaped him as it did, his mouth instinctively opening to take a leap of faith and admit that serpentine tongue. Crowley's own mouth grew warmer still, hungry for more of this divine being, somehow impossibly his to kiss. His hand moved of its own accord to the angel's shoulder to pull him closer. Likewise, Aziraphale's own hand found the demon's waist and tugged until they were clasped against each other, their glorious, incorruptible bodies as one. Now, deep within and soaring together, their fears cast to the misty waters below, they kissed like the other was life. They kissed like they were making up for millennia worth of time lost. And of course they were. How had they not realized this sooner? How had they possibly been so blind? And now Aziraphale's hands were twisting through Crowley's sleek, soft hair, and Crowley's long, versatile tongue was acquainting itself with Aziraphale's own, tasting the angel's sweet nectar, whilst his fingers traced the delicate tendons around collarbone and drew gasps of pleasure from them both. When they finally drew themselves apart, when they came back into time and corporeality, they were smiling from ear to ear, grinning at each other. They were glowing. Aziraphale ran his tongue around his lips, tasting salt and iron and, odd, something bitter and unfamiliar, almondy. You taste like blood, he stated, and he relished the taste. Crowley grinned at him, indeed revealing a mouth that glistened too red, the consequence of his most undemonic of revelations. With his snake-like eyes and his bloodied mouth and his manic smile, he looked like a wild animal as it peers around for second helpings.
It hurt a little, he admitted. Not a mouth made for such words.
He was still smiling as he wiped at the crimson with the back of a hand, then looked at the flash of color against his white skin. He licked and he tasted, and the sight of that long, agile tongue on pale flesh, the barely perceptible sound that accompanied it, set Aziraphale burning like he hadn't felt for more than a millennium. "My dear," breathed Aziraphale, aching. "My dear." Crowley could feel a hiss rising in his throat like a purr of pleasure. He took Aziraphale by the shoulders, and they embraced again, holding each other, breathing them in, promising with silent words to never leave each other's side from now on, come heaven, hell, or high water. Crowley smiled into Aziraphale's fragrant mass of hair and caressed his shoulder blades, feeling pinions and small delicate bones and metaphysical voids filled with feathers coiled away from the corporeal world. He shut his eyes and hissed softly with utter contentment. "My angel." And as they embraced, behind them to the east, the new day's sun had finally broken across the surface of the ocean, a perfect, shimmering, rose-pink orb of radiance that slowly left its twin behind on the glistening waters, that bathed the world in warmth and color, that finally chased away the restless, hazy, and sleepless night. To be continued in Chapter 7. Thank you for reading.
Please drop by the archive and let the author know what you thought of their work.